Crossovers have multiplied like some kind of zombie infestation since their inception in the late 90s. While the Ford Explorer and Jeep Grand Cherokee popularized the SUV form factor throughout the 90s, it wasn't until the Lexus RX came out at the end of the decade that automakers took a step back and realized that a sort of hybrid mashup of the SUV form with the sort of sedan's drivability could woo potential buyers.
It'll be $18.
Here you go, keep the change.
Of course, the AMC Eagle and the original Toyota RAV4 were technically crossovers themselves, but the Eagle wasn't really styled like a fake SUV. And the RAV4 was approximately the size of a shoe. Maybe a large shoe, but a shoe. So how did this whole crossover thing get so out of hand? Well, let's talk about that. So the Lexus RX dropped in 1998, immediately following the debut of the Mercedes ML, which looked a lot like a hideous delivery van. And unlike that ML, the Lexus RX was actually somewhat new and interesting to look at. We didn't realize it at the time, but the Lexus RX was previewing what was to come with the crossover takeover. It was sort of softer and more livable. It wasn't trying to be one of these rugged and tough SUVs. And that brings us to this, the 2005 Toyota Highlander. And after you hear my reasons for why I think this is sort of the genesis point for all modern SUVs, let me know in the comments if you think I got it right or if I got it wrong. And if I got it wrong, tell me why. Tell me what you think is the sort of origin point for the crossover craze. The Highlander followed the Lexus RX to market, debuting as a 2001 model. And while there had been Ford Explorers and Jeep Cherokees and Nissan Pathfinders, Toyota 4Runners for years, they were all truck-based SUVs. The Highlander was the first mainstream mid-size crossover, just edging out the Honda Pilot and the Nissan Murano to the market. It didn't need to be as large as the Honda Pilot, which was actually better in some ways, because Toyota had the Sequoia, which came out at the same time. And it wasn't as stylish as the Nissan Murano, which I know it's hard to believe, youthful people out there, but the Murano was kind of a game changer when it came out around that time. But it also was the beginning of Nissan's love affair with the CVT automatic transmission. So there's that. And by there's that, I mean that sucks.
You know better, right? Why?
This 2005 base model Highlander is powered by a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine, making 160 horsepower and 165 pound-feet of torque, which is, of course, adequate. It's not fast. It's really not fast.
Must go faster.
It also has a 4-speed automatic transmission, which ironically kind of feels like driving a CVT in 2022. I'm sure it will last forever, literally, but it is an odd feeling when you're used to driving 8 and 10-speed automatics now. But that was good enough for the time period. People weren't expecting the type of performance that they expect in mainstream vehicles these days. And they certainly weren't expecting it in a new form factor like a crossover SUV. So what was the ride and handling like, especially compared to modern vehicles? This isn't exactly relevant, up-to-date information.
I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story.
However, many of the characteristics by the way this thing drives are very familiar in today's landscape of crossover vehicles. I mean, first and foremost is that this drove like a car because it's basically just a Camry. So it didn't exhibit any of the unpleasant truckishness of, kind of body-on-frame SUVs of the time, or, unibody SUVs like the Cherokee, but that were intended to go off-road, not meant for pavement, or at least compromised on pavement. So this was, in its own weird way, a breath of fresh air, and it feels pretty decent from behind the wheel by today's standards. Now, I don't want to lose the entire audience discussing the handling nuances of a 2005 Toyota Highlander, but just for comparison purposes, it is kind of interesting the difference in a crossover like back then versus a crossover now. The ride comfort isn't bad. I'm on the handling road actually, and it's okay, but I will say that Toyotas tend to be kind of on the softer side, more comfortable side. This is comfortable, but it can't seem to control itself. There is a lot of secondary body motion here after the initial impact instead of smoothing it out. So I do think that that's kind of a noteworthy improvement of just what we expect in sort of the refinement of a vehicle. You know, the throttle's fine because there's not a lot of power. Brakes are fine, nothing special there. Steering, whatever, who cares? Not that important if I'm being honest. So this is a very competent handling vehicle, other than the fact that it moves around a bit more than, you know, you would expect in a modern SUV. I will say, honestly, two things that stand out kind of driving newer vehicles and then driving this kind of throwback and how far we've come, or in some cases taken a step back. I'll explain in a second. One of the ways that we've advanced the sort of crossover genre, and I definitely sense that being in this, is that this is a bare bones model, but it is pretty much a wash in hard plastic. And the seats, more importantly, are not particularly comfortable. They're kind of lumpy and overly soft. My butt fell asleep earlier when I went to the grocery store, not a long trip. My back isn't super great supported, even though I have the lumbar turned up. So that is something that, like, I'm kind of like, wow, man, we used to like sit in these seats and like drive on long distances. These are not the most comfortable seats in the world. Now, one area in which I notice a huge difference from a lot of SUVs now is that the amount of light in this thing and the sight lines of this thing are like kind of ridiculous by today's standards. We've got a lot of vehicles now with higher belt lines and smaller windows because, you know, it kind of looks cooler. It sort of popularizes that more like small greenhouse, that kind of chop top look. And I think we see that even in SUVs, even things like the Telluride, you know, which is famous for its design, has that kind of cool design. This thing is so bright and airy by today's standards. Like it is like on another level. You can see in every direction. But there is no denying from behind the wheel here with simple gauge cluster and all of this sort of ergonomic functionality, there is no denying that this is kind of the origin point. This is kind of patient zero for the crossover takeover. That basic practicality extends inside, and there are some sort of modernish touches that you're kind of surprised to find in a vehicle this old, and that are sort of expected, if not standard, in crossover vehicles today. In fact, I would argue that most buyers just kind of assume that these things will be in crossover vehicles now. It's decently roomy in here with simple ergonomics, and you'll notice there's no screen, but that was sort of normal for the time period. All the controls, though, are really simple, and 17 years later, they still feel good today. And when I mean simple, I mean like really simple. Like it still has a cassette player, simple. Do you even know what cassettes are? Comment down below, seriously, comment down below if you have ever seen a cassette in real life. If you've ever touched a cassette in real life, say, I touched a cassette in the comments. I would love to know. I imagine most people shopping for Toyota Highlanders would probably remember 8-tracks or, you know, phonographs. And to be fair, it was unusual for this to have a cassette player, even in 2005. But to be honest with you, it's the versatility of the center console that kinda is blowing my mind for a vehicle that's 17 years old. Even in the early 2000s, you have a floating center console that has a space beneath with an old school power port, just where you would find a modern SUV's floating center console with storage and USB ports. You have multiple storage cubbies. You have what, well, back then was the ashtray. You have cup holders here, and you have storage here, and you have many, many more cup holders in the doors, and in the rear doors, 2 cup holders apiece. The Toyota Highlander was from the beginning ready for family life and everything it could throw at it. And that continues back here. You have the dual cup holders, as I said, but you also have sliding rear seats, which, I mean, that's just crazy for the time period. And as you can clearly see, I am easily able to fit behind myself in a, what by today's standards would be considered a small to mid-size SUV. You know what I mean? Like this is on the smaller end of what we would call mid-size in 2022. This was mid-size back then. So plenty of room. It's very simple, but it's highly functional. But it's this cargo space that really does it for me. This is nearly 40 cubic feet of cargo space, which is highly usable. It's shaped like a box. It's adjustable. You can fold the rear seats down, of course. It's just in a massive amount of room for a vehicle of this size. It's reminiscent, as I said before, of the Honda Passport, which I really like for its usability. It's not my favorite midsize SUV, but I think it's one of the most functional. And this 17-year-old Toyota Highlander reminds me of that Passport. Compared to the Toyota Camry of the time period, this is an enormous amount of cargo space. Although I did have to remove the random towels that were back here because, like I said, it's my mom's car, and what do you find in the back of a 7-year-old woman's car? Random towels. When it first came out, Motor Trend said that the Highlander had sort of car-like dynamics and handling, as well as fuel economy, with sort of SUV space, practicality, and visibility. Which, if you think about it, kind of sums up why crossover vehicles have become so incredibly popular. We all act like it's a big mystery, but the Toyota Highlander printed the blueprint, which printed the blueprint. It printed the blueprint for the current crossover vehicle craze. It's a spacious and practical little wannabe SUV that gives buyers most of the perks of owning an SUV and asks for almost zero sacrifices in return. It's dead reliable, gets decent fuel economy, and can easily carry our family of 4 anywhere over long distances. It's so incredibly good at its core mission that we're never gonna get back to sedans, are we? This is it. This is it. Guys, I hope you like this video. Let me know what you think. I want to try to provide some more kind of contextual videos like this in the future. I just thought I was borrowing my mom's Toyota Highlander when I didn't have a press car just to kind of carpool the kids around. And I was just sitting thinking that it all makes sense. Of course crossovers have taken over. I'm not saying I want them to, and I'm certainly not saying I agree, and I'm certainly losing the sun behind me, which was a cool shot a second ago, but it's not as cool now. So I'm gonna wrap up by saying crossovers are here to stay. If anything, they're here to proliferate like rabbits, and I don't think there's anything that we can do about it. Let me know in the comments if you agree. If you like this kind of content, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Ring the bell for notifications. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, drive safe. I'll see you soon. Peace. Right as you press play, airplanes overhead. Isn't that always the way? Filming in a flight path, apparently. Why are there so many crappy trucks out here? I mean, I know the answer, but there's such a fine line between cool and trash. That's on the trash side of the line. It didn't need to be as large. Jesus Christ, why are there always dogs fighting? Is this like freaking dog war? And here comes that idiot with her stupid barking dog. God, why would you want to own a GTI if it sounds like farts? Like, what's the point?